Hey, this is Unique Perspectives. Okay, so I want to look over this book that was recommended by Brandon Caserta, The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larken Rose. Now, Brandon Caserta, if you haven't heard of him, is an anarchist, and he was one of the people that, it's not him, he has the same name, it's him, in the Whitmer trial, where supposedly a group of people in the Wolverine Watchmen planned to organize some way to kill Governor Whitmer, even though that's very questionable of if that really happened and if the FBI encouraged it to happen, encouraged people to say certain things, pretending to be their friends and whatnot. But anyways, that's a whole separate issue that I think the media really hasn't covered their side of the story very much. In the media, they kind of cover it a little bit, but it's not a major story. Even though I think it should be because it shows that there's a lot of FBI corruption involved. Whether or not you think that these people are guilty or not, he was acquitted. Um, he goes by, I think, Kinetic Truth on TikTok. So he made a lot of, let's see, uh, TikTok, Kinetic Truth. He made a lot of TikToks, and then I was trying to figure out some of these things that he would say, something about authority, and I think, who's your master, or do you really own like a vehicle? Is it really yours if the government can like pull you over for a traffic violation or something? So then I started reading this book. You can buy it on Amazon. I did Google it though for like free PDFs because I'm cheap, and I did find this. It's really inconvenient though to read it like this because you can't download it unless you make an account, a Scribd account. But I just basically just looked at the preview thing and just supersized it, full sized it, and went all the way down. But um, so this is a look into the anarchist mindset. Now he's not the only kind of anarchist out there. There's there's anarcho communist thought. There's other kinds of anarchist thought. But anarchist thought, I think, I'm not an expert about all these things. A lot of this was new to me, but it seems like anarchists are not really necessarily liberal or conservative. They're usually, I think, more on the libertarian side where they don't, at least they claim not to want government involvement in various things. Now, a lot of this stuff is debatable, though, of who's more hypocritical than who, the anarchists or the I guess you could call them the author authoritarians, or the people that believe in the idea of authority. This book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, if you can guess what that is, um, Larkin Rose claims that it's basically the belief in authority, like in the belief that it's justified to have a government. And he is right that almost every single thing we know about or how we organize ourselves in society is there is government for everything. We have a post office. We do have lots of things that don't require much government, like a grocery store. Um, but we have so many bureaus like the FBI, the CIA, just a lot of bureaucracy. It's like to even go fishing, you need a license. Some of that I can agree with possibly, but he's saying that there should be no authority whatsoever. That it's he seems to look at it from, I would say, a biased point of view. He looks at that the fact that authority is only bad and never ever good, even when they they do protect certain good things, like making sure that they protect you from someone, like the cops trying to protect you from someone killing you. Now, now he would just say he's against all authority, even though even at the end of the book, I want to show you something. He said something like he copyrighted the book. What did he say? So that something so that okay, let's just read what he said. Um, A copyright is usually an implied threat. Don't copy this, or else, while I hope that anyone else who likes this book will buy additional copies from me, if someone does copy this book without my permission, that would not alone make me feel justified in using force against that person or owned via government. If, however, someone made piles of money from making and selling bootlegged copies, I might get nasty. That's understandable. But I copyrighted the book primarily so that no one else could copyright it, and thereby use the violence of the state to prevent me from distributing it. Now, that's interesting because the whole book, pretty much, keeps talking about how we don't need authority, even though he does say something like there's nothing wrong with using the benefits that are provided from, for example, forced taxation, like using the public roads. He's not someone that would try to ever avoid using a public road or ever using a bureaucracy or something that involves government. Um, part of the proof of that is what he said, that he copyrighted the book. So to copyright the book, you would think that he believes in the justification of authority, right? That the government should be in charge of copyrights, patents, etc. Like like legally be able to stop somebody from making copies of his book and selling it, for example, and pretending that it's theirs, or maybe just selling his book and just not giving them royalties, something like that, and making money off of it, especially, he would have an issue with. And that's understandable, but then he goes through the government to enforce that, though, and then claims that government's not necessary and all they do are bad things. But when it helps him out, he makes it seem like that's a good thing almost. But I don't get it, because the whole book he talks about how authority is a bad thing and that you should stop believing in authority. He says that authority doesn't even exist. Like authority, I want to say authority means something like, he says it means something like the right to rule. Um, I don't know if I would agree with that. Because I think authority just means they're in charge. The society designates them to be in charge. As far as them having the right to rule, I guess you could say society has assigned them that role to rule, but I don't know if I would describe it that way. Let's see again what the dictionary says. Authority: the power or right to give orders, make decisions. I mean, that's probably accurate enough of a definition, the right to rule, because it is kind of a neutral definition. It's not saying that there's always it's always a bad type of rule over somebody, over a group of people. So authority, I just want to show you that definition, and then government, because he defines those. He says they're pretty much the same. And you can see I looked it up before. The governing body of a nation, state, or community. Yeah, but that doesn't explain what a government is. the system by which a nation state, it already says that, governed. The action or man, here's a real definition, not using the definition to describe the definition, or to describe the word. The action or manner of controlling or regulating a nation, organization, or people. Um, yeah, that's kind of what I would say. And I mean, I guess he could say it's a philosophical right to rule, at least for authority. Um, and government is the way in which you do it. Let's go back to it, the book. I agree with a lot of what he said, but a lot of what he said that everyone, even if they're a statist is someone that he claims is the opposite of an anarchist, somebody that believes in authority, even if the authority may not be completely justified. They might just support it anyways, just because it's like, well, the government said it, so it must be right, or authorities said it, so I'm not going to question it. Uh, and yes, it was hard for me to really keep it, even me, for me to keep an open mind. But I really wanted to keep an open mind because I'm like, well, this is new type of philosophy that I haven't really heard before, because whenever people think of anarchists, they think of that crazy anarchist symbol, and they just think, oh, this, I don't know, that almost looks like satanic, or even, I know anarchy has uh, re- has a relationship a lot of times with Antifa or like communism or whatever. So like people are like, especially I feel like anarchy, even when I googled it on Wikipedia, it's more of a left wing um it's more of a left wing movement historically, like with Karl Marx and communism. Communism, socialism, that's usually um, the type of philosophy. So actually, if someone's an anarchist, like Brandon Caserta, he's probably, it depends on how much of an anarchist he is, but he's probably more actually on the liberal side. But I could be, I mean, he sounds kind of conservative to me, but he might actually really be more on the liberal side, like, Antifa type of, on that type of side, but maybe not on the Antifa side, I don't think, but kind of believes in a lot of the same things that they probably believe in, that we shouldn't have a government, or that the government's corrupt. And even a lot of, actually, that's what a lot of conservatives share with the idea of extreme liberalism, is that um, the government is corrupt, so we need a different kind of government, whether that's communism or ultra capitalism or whatever. I think that's something that a lot of more extremists share. But extremist doesn't mean they're necessarily wrong. It just means they're not, like, you could say moderate, and even Larken Rose says moderate is more uh, like a compromise, let's just say, between the left and right, that it still believes in usually the idea of authority, but it's like you're like not really that liberal and not really that conservative. I just want to show you what he looks like. He has his own YouTube channel, by the way. Here's his website, but you should look at a picture of him. I haven't looked through I haven't looked through a lot of his stuff. He has made videos like this. He looks like
Hey, Larken
this.
Rose.
He looks like that. So he was in jail for not paying his taxes, I believe he said in the book. Um, so apparently um, he thought that it's okay for him to not pay his taxes. Um, let's see if I can pull that up. And he was in jail, I want to say, for some time for it. And he said he gained a lot of sympathy. Um, want to say evade taxes. I'll find it later. Um, so, anyways, let's scroll down. He's basically saying that the root of a lot of evil is that there's a belief in authority. So instead of someone justifying it with some kind of logic, they might just do certain actions because somebody told them to. And he did point to the Milgram experiments, and he did point to how the military, a lot of times, like in various wars, like the War of Iraq, they might shoot somebody because they were told to without really knowing why they should or shouldn't. And same, he kind of compared that to the Nazis, how they were just following orders. And I think that is a decent comparison, um, because the Nazis were just following orders, but that didn't really make it justified. But the way they did justify it, I think I agree with him when he says that it's the belief in authority plus the fact that they would be socially ostracized and probably prosecuted even if they didn't follow orders. It wasn't just because they wanted to kill Jews or whatever. It's because they felt like they had to obey authority. See, that's the thing that I think about good and bad people is like, how are you supposed to define a good and bad person? Is it somebody that follows the rules even when they don't make any sense and they might actually hurt people? Or is it the people that do the opposite, that only follow the good rules? Um, so he makes it seem like the good people. It's hard to figure out what he means by good people. When he says good people, are those the people that follow the rules, or are those the people that only follow the good rules? He says that good people believe in authority. Yeah, but there's some good people. He would even argue there's a lot of good people that don't believe in authority. Um, for example, somebody could be good, smoke marijuana. They could be a good person though, but even though they, let's just say they smoked marijuana when it was illegal, like, just because you jaywalk, that doesn't make you a bad person just because you broke the law. Um, so I would say yes, there are a lot of good. It's probably more common for good people to believe in authority, but I don't think that's how you would define good and evil. Um, he makes a lot of He makes a lot of, I believe, are false premises though. I'll get to that later. Let's just scroll down, and then I want to see if I can. Oops, I want to see if I can find something to talk about. I mean, I know a lot to talk about, but I want to do it in order. This is a 200-page book that you can read for free. Evils of society, yeah, we already talked about that. In history, historically, authority has been abused a lot. I agree with that, but he makes it seem like all authority is bad, and I don't know if I agree with that. Even after reading the whole book, I can't necessarily agree with that because of reasons I'll state later about how he doesn't seem to ever point out the good things about authority. Like the idea he thinks of authority, at least he says, is that it's always bad because it leads to compounding the issue of injustice. So instead of having to justify something, you can just say you have authority to do this or that, and people are supposed to just go along with it. And a lot of people, when they go through schooling, they are taught to just respect authority. Same with their parents. Even though I don't know why he makes an exception for parents when he's talking about authority, because to me that makes no sense. Um, he may describe it a little bit differently than a form of government, but to me, I don't see how it's any different. Um, like parents, that is a parent's job to make sure that their child, since your 2-year-old child doesn't know what's best for them, they might run across the street. So you need rules, and you need to enforce them so that your 2-year-old child doesn't run across the road and get hit by a car. So not everyone knows what's best for them. That's why people believe in he calls it the myth of authority, because he thinks that adults do, are they are claimed to not know what's best for them by other adults, even adults. So people say we need a government because without it we would just have chaos. He disagrees with that because he says that there would be enough social pressure to not have a lot of chaos, and that a lot of chaos is as the result of the government. And he basically says that by putting the government in charge, it's not really going to solve the problem, because you're just putting people that could be corrupt in charge to try to solve the problem of like other people being corrupt, but that doesn't really necessarily solve the problem, and I do agree with that. But he makes it sound like even if the government was, almost perfect, or even maybe even perfect, he would still disagree with it. Like you could have like a perfect authoritarian government, and he would still disagree with it just on principle. So let's go down. I already talked about Hitler. The state is to someone that believes in government. Um, he doesn't think we need government to organize things like mutual defense. We don't need government. Yes, we don't always need government for that. Um, it's possible to organize for people to organize themselves into, let's just say, various groups, whatever groups you want to associate with, like a football fan team, or a local political group, or whatever you want to associate with, a speech and debate club. Yes, you don't always need government for everything. No, but nobody says that though. They don't say you need government to organize anything. What people argue successfully, I think, is that you may need government to organize large projects like the Hoover Dam. Would that really have been organized just with private parties? Um, Probably not, because you would have the free rider issue. The free, and that's what I don't think he covered enough um, in his book. He didn't cover he didn't cover like any of the cons of anarchism, really. Hardly any. He just covered all the pros of it. And let's go to and I even looked up, how do anarchists deal with the free rider problem, and they don't. Um, they try to use false analogies, like compare it to the workforce and how in the capitalist system, yes, in a lot of workplaces, by working harder, you don't necessarily get paid more, or any benefit out of working harder than just doing the bare minimum to keep your job. But that's talking about something totally different. That's the workplace, and that's not all workplaces. That's just some of them. Like if you work at a grocery store, that's probably accurate. I worked for Walgreens before, but Um, but anyways, the free rider problem is an issue in economics. It is considered an example of market failure. That is an inefficient distribution of goods or services that occurs when some individuals are allowed to consume more than their fair share of the shared resources or pay less than their fair share of the costs. Okay, and even Larken Rose, I would describe him as a free rider. Somebody that thinks he shouldn't have to pay taxes, yet, um, I mean, I guess he doesn't think anybody should pay taxes, to be fair, but it's like, does he really expect everyone to risk, like, breaking the law and going to jail like he did? Just to make a political point or whatever he was trying to do, or not pay his taxes. Um, I think that's kind of. I mean, I guess they could, yeah. If everyone stopped paying their taxes, then they couldn't enforce it, just like prohibition. But do you really want everyone? I mean, you would have to get everyone really organized to do that. Just you or someone else individually not paying their taxes. That's not going to change anything. You would have to have like he said, like 10% or something of people just not pay their taxes, because they're probably not going to lock up that many people. They're probably just going to change the system somehow. But I think his solutions are kind of unrealistic, because how in a flash are you going to all of a sudden convince everyone to not pay taxes, or a large percentage of the population? You're not, probably, um, unless somehow you really rise to power like Hitler. Um, but see, the free rider, at least how I remember the free rider problem, is not just when someone consumes more than their fair share of the shared resource, but they literally will pay nothing for it and try to get the benefits of that resource, or not try to get the benefits of the resource because they don't think they need it, or or maybe they think they could use it if it's built, but they don't really need it right now. Like a big water project. Are people really going to donate, let's just say $50? Is everyone going to donate $50 for a big dam project to make it so that their community gets more electricity? No, they're like, we already have electricity that we need. Why do we need another project? Like, maybe it could save us money by making the electricity cheaper or whatnot, but people don't normally support things that they don't know about, things that are new to them, um, and things where, like I was saying, where they might just have to donate their money to it, and then, like, what happens to that money? They're not sure what will happen to that money. Will enough other people raise money for it, and if the project doesn't work out, will they get their money back? It's like, these are questions that need to be answered. So they might not just be like a leech, like a freeloader. They might just be somebody that literally doesn't even think they would need the service that someone's proposing, or project. Um, now let's just think about, like, an art building that is planned for the community. Would that really benefit the community? Maybe it would, but I think only a select few people would really care about something like that. So why are you gonna force everyone to pay for something that benefits so few people? Um, I think that's part of the issue with the free rider problem. But, well, I guess then you could say it's not really a problem. The problem is with the people that expect everyone else to pay for what they say they need. Even though he kind of argues against that, because he's saying that people use authority to get other people to do stuff that they want them to do by, like, force. Instead of using logic or reasoning, they just want to force people and not take any of the responsibility or blame or backlash. They just want the government to be the ones to take the backlash instead of them. Okay, let's go down. Let's go back to the book. But yeah, I even looked up on Google. I didn't see any rebuttals to the free rider problem really that made any sense to me, because comparing it to like the workplace or communism or whatever, I think that's a false analogy. The free rider issue. So that's the question: is do we need roads in the first place? Do we need electricity for our homes? Do we need cheap water and water that can be provided to all these homes? If you think no, then maybe anarchism makes sense. But if you think we want to live in like a modern society, then I don't see how you could realistically be an anarchist. Excuse me, kind of sick. Because this stuff cannot be um, the money cannot be generated solely through private means, is my point. Like, could you really have everything we had today if there was no government? Um, he does argue that you can't really say that there's no successful anarchist society, because that's often compared to like a society that has a government, like a large society. But then that kind of proves the point of the status that says, look at his history. Has there been any large anarchist society? And I don't think there has been. They talk about the Wintu and whatnot that I don't know that much about. Like there might be various Native American tribes or people groups in certain countries that supposedly were anarchists, and they probably were anarchists, um, but not really any large society, which kind of shows that likely nobody needed government until felt like they needed government. So he still thinks no matter how big a society is, you don't need government, you don't need authority, because it's like you can't justify it. And that he still calls it a superstition, like believing in Santa Claus. Like, you can't believe in authority because it doesn't exist. The right to rule doesn't exist. Um, However, he does admit that people believe in that, just like they believe in God or Santa Claus or something. So, and it does affect people. But I've never heard it described as a myth before. That's why this book really caught me off guard, is that it's a myth or a superstition of authority. Okay, let's go down. Let's go actually up to where it says chaos. He said something about chaos. Is that it would be, there would be I don't know, I'm just going to talk about it. I don't see it, but I did see it earlier on one of these pages, that you would have chaos if you didn't have any authority. I mean, he wouldn't say that, but he says society says that. Um, but he argues that you wouldn't have chaos because people naturally would threaten other people and say, well, if you do this, I'm gonna defend myself. Like, if you rob me, I'm gonna whatever, prevent myself from being robbed or shoot you or whatever. But the thing with that is to me that seems like that's not a standardized way of dealing with crime or injustice. It's like anybody could just come up with with like their own morals and whatever, and how they plan to deal with a situation. It's like, well, how do you plan to stop somebody that overreacts to something, like shoot someone because they stole a candy from him. How do you stop that in an anarchist society? Um, he would say naturally people wouldn't want to just kill people or do violence over small things because someone could retaliate against them or society could ostracize them or whatever, but or at least has social pressure. I mean, actually, some of the stuff I don't think he argued it. I found it elsewhere about other anarchists. Uh, he did, I think, say something along those lines, though. Um, I would say he's somewhat correct in that if you don't have a government, yes, you would have people out of necessity needing to get along with each other more instead of going to the authorities for stuff. You would have people um, work it out amongst themselves, but actually, authority gives people an avenue to go to before they have to engage in vigilante justice. So, if anything, it also avoids a lot of violence that he doesn't talk about. He doesn't seem to think that author- authority is ever good for anything. Imagine you have a dispute with somebody else in a classroom. Like you're both students in a classroom, and you don't like somebody, let's just say, physically pushing you around. Instead of telling the teacher, what would you have to do? You would have to take the matter into your own hands and either push back or whatever. I mean, something, fight back or run away, something. You would have to go outside the teacher to solve your own problems. And we know that when that happens, you can have a lot more chaos. Like I was saying, like it's just remember or just think of like a bar fight or something. Like that's where they feel like they can fight someone because of something they said or whatever, or maybe they got pushed first. Um, would we really want to live in a society like that where you don't have a controlled way, an orderly way to handle problems where it's more like a bunch of disputes that could end fatally over something that could be really minor. He makes it seem like that would be very rare. Maybe it would be somewhat rare, um, but I don't think it would be that rare because part of the reason is why do we have government? It's probably out of necessity, like I was saying, where people never saw, let's just say, shootings as a problem until they were a problem, or at least until they realized that it was they perceived that it was a problem. So then they started enacting gun laws and whatnot, even though you could argue that it's not worth it to have these gun laws and that it makes things worse. But the reason for the gun laws or whatever laws or the bureaus, you need a fishing licenses because they don't want people to overfish and stuff. And some of this, to me, I think is kind of understandable. But he thinks there should be no belief in the right to rule. I don't know if that means that. I don't necessarily know if he means there should be no government whatsoever. He makes it seem like there should be no government whatsoever, even though, like I scrolled down before and showed, he believes that it's justified for him to seek a copyright. It's like, well, do you need government or do you not need government? Do you only believe in the right to authority or government, the right to rule if it benefits you, or are you really not a hypocrite and believe that you should have no government whatsoever? Like, if someone's stabbing you, you should be able to call the cops and uh, have them help you. He makes it seem like, well, while you still have a system of authority, you might you might as well get the benefit out of it. Like, you might as well use the roads and whatnot. Because I remember him saying something about a gang of robbers or thugs. If a group of, let's just say, thugs, um, said to your neighborhood, hey, we're going to collect $100 from each one of you, and you have to pay up, and it'll go to the roads or whatever, schooling or whatever, and you have to pay up. He compares the government a lot of times to like a group of thugs, and sometimes you could accurately describe them like that, um, but he describes them always in a way like that. And then he says, if, like, for example, if a group of thugs made you, everyone pay $100 for some sort of meal, if you were to eat that meal, would you be a hypocrite? He makes it seem like you wouldn't, even though he says status would say that you are because you got a benefit from it, that you chose to eat that meal. And he's like, well, like I'm already being charged $100 for it. Like I might as well eat it. And I guess I could kind of see that argument. Um, but it just makes you look more of a hypocrite, and it creates less sympathy for the anarchist type of cause, though. So that's the risk you take by benefiting from the government. Then you're like, it's like justifying its use, kind of, because you're getting benefits from it. Um, so I don't know. I think if he wants to be more convincing, he should probably not ever drive on a road that was funded by the government. He should not engage in seeking copyrights or whatever if he thinks that authority is so bad. Authority can be really bad. Let's see. Let's see. Yes, it is taught in school. A lot of it is taught in school, the idea of authority. Um, but that's for, like, he even said, kind of for parents, like, it's for a good reason. We're not just having laws just so we can have power over you. Like, like I tell people, um, you should follow laws not because it's the law or it's the rules. You should follow it because it makes sense. Like that's like primitive reasoning is when people are kids or not very logical yet, like under 13 especially. They think mostly like I'm going to follow this only because that's what the rules are. I'm not going to necessarily follow it because it's the right or wrong thing to do. They don't think of it usually like that. They think of it like, oh, I'm going to get in trouble if I don't follow this. I'm going to get grounded, or I'm going to lose privileges or whatever, instead of justifying it. Um, okay, anyways, even adults, a lot of adults, they still act like little kids where they just go along with authority just because authority told them something instead of really knowing why. And I understand that a lot, though, because what would happen if you didn't have those people? You would have a lot more skeptical, I guess you could say negative people that would question a lot of things, and that would ruin their social relationships with each other too. Because if they're questionable about the government, they're going to be questionable about their friends and family members as well. I don't think there's any way around that. You're either a optimistic type of person or you're more of a pessimistic type of person. Um, he basically says, by the way, that government's pretty much the same as authority, like synonymous. Um, he repeats a lot of his same points over and over, but to me, that's kind of like propaganda because just to keep calling the government a bunch of thugs and stuff, I mean, you can keep saying that over and over, but you have to prove some of this stuff. Um, I mean, society has deemed that they have the right to rule, and yes, people can disagree that they are not corrupt. But he thinks that all government is corrupt naturally because the only point of government is to control somebody, and that it's really only used for bad things, even though he kind of ignores the fact when they have done something good, because he makes it seem because they have the potential to do something bad. um, let's take seatbelt laws for example. He didn't talk about those, but like authorities making you wear your seatbelt is has probably saved a lot of lives, even though you could argue that they shouldn't be allowed to force at least adults to wear a seatbelt, because wearing a seatbelt or not wearing a seatbelt, that doesn't affect other people besides that person. So if you choose to not wear a seatbelt, yes, you could be harmed, but that doesn't really affect other people. I guess you could say it indirectly does affect other people, because if you die or get seriously injured, you can't work and be a productive member of society, or contribute as much to society. But I mean, other than that, I mean, it doesn't harm it doesn't directly harm somebody whether you wear your seatbelt or not. It affects you. So sometimes the government has laws that people might not think are necessary for their best interest. It's like if a teacher was to tell a student, don't lean in your chair, because for various reasons you could break the chair, you could fall and hit your head. Rules are for a reason. So I don't think most people, when they first came out, I'm sure they didn't like the seatbelt law, but people don't really care now because it's such a small inconvenience for such a good reason. Like they should be wearing the seatbelt anyways. So I think even most libertarians, they don't care that much about tiny little things like the government forcing us to wear seatbelts and whatnot. They're more concerned with abuse of power, the government restricting our rights in a significant way, like freedom of speech or whatever, not like forcing us to wear a seatbelt or certain safety regulations, even though they might argue against a lot of these bureaus and whatnot. And he kind of compares the idea of authority to churches and stuff, and history, and it being justified, supposedly justified based on who gave the command instead of what the command was. Like, if someone's a teacher, let's just say, or a cop or whatever, a firefighter, that it's justified because they said so, instead of it being justified because philosophically it is. He explains when, for example, someone asserts he had the authority to stop a mugger to get an old lady's purse back, or says he had authority to chase trespassers off his property. He is not claiming to possess. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is misspelled too. I've noticed a lot of misspellings in this book, so he probably should have got a better editor or edited it better himself. Anyways, special rights that others do not possess. He is simply saying that he believes in certain situations justify giving orders or using force. Okay. But to me that's a different kind of authority. Yeah, see, he says it's a different kind of authority. Not a situational type of authority, more like authority like do something because I said so, even if it doesn't make sense type of authority. Which I don't see. It's kind of confusing what he's talking about, though. I think what he's saying, he makes it sound like his people have an individual right, or maybe a group has a right to defend their own group, from crimes or whatever. Um, well, I guess maybe he wouldn't describe it as crimes because crimes implies there's a government, like there's laws. I mean, like things that, are crimes, but like stealing someone's purse. But even before it was considered a crime, it was considered wrong to steal stuff. Um, the idea that some people have the moral right to forcibly control others, and consequently, those others have a moral obligation to obey. He talks about authority, in that a lot of people believe someone has the right to control others. Yeah, they probably believe in that because they don't think police officers, firefighters, teachers are so corrupt that we need to have anarchy. Now, other people do think we need anarchy because they're so corrupt, or even like I said, they could be pretty much perfect and they would still say we should have anarchy just based on principle. He even goes against the U.S. Constitution by saying they created authority, instead of just restricting what the government could do to the people. Like instead of just creating rights, it made it sound like you're creating more government, and maybe in some ways it did, but compared to the government that they had at the time, otherwise, I think it did get the government off their back in a lot of ways. Even though we pay a lot more taxes now than the colonists probably ever did. But we haven't had a second Revolutionary War. Maybe eventually we will. Now, here's another thing. He makes it seem like the employer-employee relationship is like, a little bit different, where it's like, that's an arrangement, that's not government, that's like an agreement between you and an employer, that you're gonna, for example, provide your services for a certain amount of pay. But I would even argue with stuff like that because he's making it seem like you have reasonable choices. Like for example, in California, we still don't have choices. Like, can you really say no? I'm not gonna sign this at will agreement. I would prefer that it's not an at will agreement where you have to give me cause to fire me. Then what is the employer gonna think? They're gonna think, oh, that's a red flag. Is he trying to just slack off on, at work, or has he been fired before, whatever? And they probably won't hire that person. So the idea that you can negotiate a lot with your employer, especially if you had no government to enforce that idea, um, I don't think makes sense. But he makes it sound like you can come to an agreement with an employer, and yes, they can compromise for some reasons, like they might lose you as a worker if you go somewhere else. But I think in general the employer, yes, I think he does describe them accurately as a master in a sense. Um, I think he describes them as a master. Um, but he makes it seem like it's based on a voluntary, mutual voluntary agreement, which is different from the government, which does it by force, like forcing people to pay taxes whether or not they agree to. I guess you technically agreed to that will agreement, but you only agreed to it because you had to. Like, you wouldn't get a job unless you, quote, agreed to it, like signed it. So is that really agreeing to that will agreement? Um, Not really. I don't think when people sign the fine print or that will agreement stuff that they really are like, yeah, I agree that philosophically the employer should be allowed to fire you for any reason, even if it's not justified. Um, See, that's the thing is he thinks employers should be allowed to like fire anybody even without a justified reason, but somehow it's not okay for the government to do the same thing. Um, it's like That makes no sense to me, but he makes it seem like it makes sense. But again, I was keeping an open mind, I think, for this book before I was pretty much done with the book before I really started questioning it. Um, okay, I was just trying to take it in and think about it, but I wasn't letting myself be convinced necessarily by what he was saying. I was just trying to read it and understand that point of view first before I came up with my opinions about it. The government produces inferior results or that authority is often abused. See, he says that it's not always abused. It cannot exist at all, and the failure of that fact has led billions of people to believe and do things that are horrendously destructive. Yeah, like kill people and wars or whatever that were unjustified, or the cops, for example, enforcing laws that they don't need to be enforcing, which I agree. If someone's driving 5 miles over the speed limit, but otherwise driving safely for the given conditions, is that something they really should be pulling people over for? I think the obvious answer is no. I did that. Something like that did happen to me, and sometimes too the speed limits are set artificially low just because there have been a lot of accidents when it was raining by really stupid drivers that for some reason can't turn their steering wheel left slightly around a curve, you know, or just aren't paying attention. Like, just because there's accidents, that doesn't necessarily mean the speed limit should be really low. Like, maybe they just need to be a better driver and not get in accidents. It's just like, oh, there's so many dumb drivers that just like drive on icy or snowy conditions without snow chains, and you see those videos of like a 50 car pile up, they're all tailgating each other. It's like, well, all 50 of you are at fault actually, except the person that was at the front that slammed on their brakes, um, because you're always supposed to be far enough behind somebody that if someone slams on their brakes that you don't hit them. But yeah, people make mistakes. And he is right when he says that politicians are generally corrupt and that for some reason people respect him a lot and trust him with stuff and give him all this power to make up laws. Like he's like, how does that make sense to make up laws? Like something's either right or it's not right. It's not like it's gonna be right one year and then some other year it's not right anymore. Like maybe the law will be like that, like where it's considered okay to do. It used to be considered okay to do this, and then it's not anymore, and then it flip flops back. Let's say the next year, depending on the political mood of people. And I do agree with that. That the law is not just completely because it's based on people's opinions and people's opinions change based on what the media say. Like, think of all the COVID stuff. It's like, oh, you don't need a mask. The CDC says, then you need a mask, and everyone has to wear a mask, and then now you don't need a mask anymore, even though it's recommended. I mean, I guess that's not really completely a flip flop, but they would say stuff like, um, if you have the vaccine, you can't spread it, and then later they would say, oh, we realize you can spread it if you have the vaccine. So you gotta, I don't know, you gotta get a double vaccine or a triple or whatever. It's like they just kind of make up stuff as they go along, I think, to please the people. Like if anybody is hated by the community, they will keep pressuring the cops to try to arrest them for something. It reminds me of this guy that I had, James Hooker, as a he went to Enoch's high school. He he didn't they couldn't find any crime that he committed. Um, the cops were looking, and they couldn't find anything. And eventually, they found that, oh, from a new law, he could be arrested for oral copulation with a minor. Um, from like a long time ago, like that nobody really cared about anymore except maybe the victim. And I guess the community, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but I mean like nobody otherwise was going to charge him with this until they saw that he had a relationship with someone that was really young. She actually was an adult, um, but before she wasn't when they first knew each other. But there's no proof they did anything with each other before she turned 18. But to me, he should have just bailed out of the relationship, especially after he got all the backlash, because obviously they were looking for something to arrest him for. It's like if someone's looking to arrest you for something, just figure out the reason why they are and just maybe like break up the relationship so that they don't keep trying to get you in jail or prison for something, you know? Like any good person, let's just say if the cops follow around long enough with their cars, you're gonna make some mistake, like 2 feet over the limit line. I'm gonna pull you over for that. I remember when I used to be a police explorer, the cops would literally ask me stuff like, "Find me a reason to pull this car over," and in my mind, I was thinking, "What? Like, why are you thinking of pulling people over that haven't committed necessarily a crime yet? Like you're trying to find a reason to pull someone over." It's like I guess the point they were trying to make was you can pull people over for almost anything. Like you follow them around long enough, you can see, oh, they have a tail light out or this or that, and they can use that to stop whoever they like for whatever reason. And sometimes it does make sense to stop people like that. Like they are acting suspicious. Like, you know, what are they doing? Like dealing drugs? Like do they have drugs in their car or whatever? And I've seen cops before bluff and say that they saw someone throw the meth out the window. I've been on ride-alongs before, and I think they're allowed to bluff like that to get someone to admit it, but they're not, certain things they're not allowed to do. Um, Anyways, that's partly why I think it didn't work out being a police explorer, because I was like, I wanted to be a detective, but after seeing all the corruption and the lack of work ethic among most cops, I feel like I didn't really want to do it anyways. I didn't want to be associated with people that just follow the rules. By the way, enforcing the rules, he does say that people use the excuse that, um, what is it? I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. Yeah, that's not a good excuse, but it does allow you to deflect personal responsibility if you say stuff like that. Because because yes, it is true you're not totally responsible for this or that, but how does enforcing the law but not making the law make it so you're not responsible? It just makes you less responsible. Um, because what about the flip side? Someone that makes the law could say, "Well, I make the law but don't enforce it." It's like, which one's worse, making the law or enforcing it? I would say enforcing it's actually worse if you enforce the bad laws instead of making them, because at least when you make laws that can't be enforced very well without someone enforcing them, then someone could just break the law and it wouldn't even be an issue whether it's the law or not, you know? Um, like, for example, marijuana right before it was legalized, they usually kind of stopped prosecuting for it unless the cops could get money out of it. If the cops could get money out of it, because they get all these grants too that encourage them to just do all these Gestapo type stops where they just do these DUI checkpoints because they get money out of it. They wouldn't do it if they didn't get a benefit out of it, but that's like they're getting rewarded to violate people's constitutional rights. Even though that's not popular opinion, most people think it's okay. See, that's the thing I might agree with him with, is that almost everyone's so used to authority for everything. It's like they're willing to just let the authorities do almost whatever they want. And if somebody gets shot by the police when it wasn't deserved, they still get blamed for it because they're like, well, why was he resisting, or this or that. Um, and I can kind of understand that if someone's resisting arrest, um, they really shouldn't be shot unless they're trying to resist in such a way that they pose a threat to the officer. Like they're trying to grab the officer's gun, or they're like being arrested for something like murder, like like let's just say mass murder, and it's like you can't really let them get away because then they might just kill more people. It depends. Now let's go. Let's scroll down. He says the entire debate about how authority should be used and what the government should do is exactly as useful as debating how Santa Claus should handle Christmas. But he keeps calling government a myth, like it doesn't exist, because he defines it as the right to rule. But to me, that's not. That doesn't prove that government doesn't exist. That just proves that the government shouldn't exist. Like like for example, obviously people do believe in Santa Claus. Yes, I guess you could say Santa Claus doesn't exist, but but it exists that people believe in Santa Claus, and that affects people's actions. Sure. Um, I don't know if this is a completely logical comparison that he's saying. Um, but I guess if he defines it as the right to rule, authority, the right to rule, that you should have authority ruling something. If he defines it like that, then I guess he could call it maybe a myth. But that would be, I think, more of like a disagreement than a myth. But he wants to call it like a myth, that there is no such thing as the right to rule over somebody else. Like you shouldn't be allowed to rule over somebody else, supposedly. But see, that's the thing is he makes it seem like people naturally are gonna do the right thing without government, but it's like actually they're the ones that put the government in charge. So if the government's corrupt, it's because the people let them be corrupt. Like if people really didn't like the government, they could form another revolution or something. So the fact that they haven't means probably most people either agree with the government or are indifferent to the government. Like they're not highly opinionated one way or the other. Maybe they are kind of opinionated, but they're not so opinionated that they're going to do something about it. They're just going to keep going along with the system we have and voting one way or the other. They're not going to just stop voting. That's even though most people don't vote. But I don't think that's so much. Uh, I guess a lot of people they don't vote mostly because they don't think it's gonna affect anything. So I guess you could say a lot of people could be convinced to be anarchists because they already don't believe uh, in voting. But I think mostly that's out of laziness. That's not, or because they're not interested in politics. That's not so much them refusing to vote because they think it's a broken system. There are people that say that, but that's not most people. I'd say most people that don't vote, they just don't think it matters. Like, or they're just not negative people in general. So they probably don't get involved in all these political discussions. They just want to stay out of politics. They might believe politics. I mean, they might have opinions here and there, but they don't go into it. That's why I think so many people get so emotional when people talk about politics, because normally they don't talk about politics, or because they see themselves as a victim. Um, they don't like people challenging their beliefs for whatever reason, because they're probably trying to control somebody else. But I think a lot of it has to do with it not being logic. They know what they're saying may not be completely logical, and instead of defending it rationally, they might just get emotional about it. Anyways, let's scroll down to see more of this book. Where's confiscation of property? I'm gonna just try to, because this is a long video. How long has this been going on for? I don't know, an hour and 10 minutes. I'm gonna just see if there's other points I can talk about that I think are kind of false premises from this book. Crime. Oh, he does talk about how, I think he meant to say 1945. It was a crime to hide Jews from the SS, the something socialists. Um, what does that even stand for? SS Germany. It stands for Schutzstaffel, protective echelon. I studied a little bit of German for fun in my free time, but anyways, to go to back to the story, he's saying that some things that are a crime that are actually morally right to do, like hiding Jews from the Germans, like Anne Frank type of stuff, is like, or the Underground Railroad, hiding slaves from the slave masters. So he's like, just because something's illegal doesn't make it wrong, which we all agree with that at times. We already talked about how cops may, abuse their power, or maybe not abuse their power and just be giving out tickets to people for petty things like traffic violations, and sometimes it's not petty, but things like like a tail light not being lit or whatever, I'd say is pretty petty. I guess they could pull you over for it. I wish they would more often warn you for it though, and not just like ticket you for it. But sometimes I guess they eventually do have to ticket you for it to prevent society from just everyone having their tail light out if they never enforced it. Okay, countries and nations. Let's scroll down. He keeps talking about slaves and masters for almost everything. Let's get into the more controversial stuff. Oh, he was saying too that how can you consent to like for like a group? Like how can you, for example, how can you agree for a group to be a different group that didn't consent to it to be handled a certain way? Like how how can you say that people consented to taxation when a lot of people didn't? Like, let's just say 60% of society votes and says, we should increase taxes so we can pay for schools or whatever. It's like, but how can you agree? How can your consent like almost like force other people to give consent? But even he made it sound like in an anarchical society that you would decide things based on democracy. But I don't know why he thinks it's not okay for someone to do that through a form of government. To me, that makes no sense. It's like, yeah, humans are gonna do like the same stuff whether they have a government or not. Like, a community is gonna vote on something just like animals do. Animals usually have a democracy. Uh, Do animals have a democracy? That's usually, I think, their most common form of government when I looked it up. Because I was like, wait, how do animals govern themselves? So if you just think about it, an early human would their government would probably be similar to that of animals. So it says queen bees and alpha chimps are voted into office, but that doesn't mean they're despots, despots, whatever. Um, there's shared decision making. Oh yeah, that reminds me too. When the birds, when it's time for the seagulls to take off, they all take off at once. It's not like you really struggle with as a teacher with student. I mean, it's not like the teacher versus student struggle where it's like you have to keep nagging certain students to follow along. Um, it's different. It's like, well, they all work as a cohesive group. It seems like I've never really seen like a seagull refusing to take off. It's like, well, if you don't take off when all the rest take off, then you're getting abandoned. you know, like you have to, out of necessity, take off to stick with the group. Otherwise, you might not survive. But it's different. Human beings, it's not quite like that. I think maybe we baby humans too much. And it's like in the modern world where you can rebel and still survive, but other animals they can't do that because they don't have the complicated system of government that we have, and they have different types of lives. Um, it said something like when 60% of the adults stand up for the red deer, that's usually when the herds move. It's not like, you know, just a few of them move. Um, it's like no, they only move when 60% of them stand up, not just when one or two outlier, behavior type deers just want to go somewhere. The whole group doesn't go somewhere just because a few of them go want to go somewhere. Like they wait till more of the group wants to move before they move, because this does mitigate the idea that um, the erratic behavior of certain animals, animals within a group, is just going to cause the whole group to do something like impulsively, like because one animal wants to go off a cliff, that all the rest are going to go off the cliff. There are some species that maybe that's true, but for most species of animal, they're not that stupid. They they make decisions as a group. They don't just follow one person. They tend to follow the group, and that normalizes a lot of the differences between them. No one individually or as a group can give consent for something to be done to someone else. I forget where it says that, uh, where he makes it seem though that like, you know, you can vote like based on a group or democracy if you had no government. I guess. See, that's what doesn't make sense about this book. It seems like a lot of it is like hypocritical. It's like, I know maybe his argument um, is that government only makes things worse, and that it never makes something better, because when there is a problem it always gets compounded, like multiplied basically, when you have a government instead of it just being a smaller issue, like in a group society where you vote as a group. If you had no government, let's just say you vote as a group, even though I guess, I mean, that almost is like a government, but it's not, where you have some people that are appointed to rule over others. I guess if that's what you mean by government, then there's no government for, like, let's just say, like, I don't know, maybe I don't know if this is completely accurate for like an Amish society, like, but let's just say like 60% of the Amish people want to allow cell phones. then they probably would allow cell phones. Um, but not everyone agreed to it, you know? So it's like maybe they don't, maybe the other 40% don't want to live in a society that allows cell phones, but they're still forced to anyways because of the other 60%. Um, so I don't know why he thinks it's okay. He makes it seem like it's okay for that to happen, but not okay for the government to be set up that way. So I guess his issue, I guess, then is with the government and not with what he pretends like there's issues with, that he has issues with. I don't think he really has an issue with what he says he does. Like right here, no one individually as a group can give consent for something to be done to someone else. That is simply not what consent means. Um, but he makes it seem like it's okay for someone to do that. That's not part of the government. He compares everything to like thugs or like robbers or whatever. Oh, he does make the argument. He does make some good points though about how people say, "Well, if you don't like this country or this state, leave." And it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense necessarily because what about every other country or state? They might be worse off. Or what if you can't leave? Like what if no other country will let you into their country? It's like no, how about instead of just saying for people to if they don't like it leave to improve the law. Like that's not a good excuse for someone to say if you don't like it leave. Like that doesn't really justify anything. That just means they don't want you around if you're a certain type of person. That doesn't mean what they're doing is justified or that you are at fault for whatever it is because you chose to stay in that area. It's like first off, not everyone is even aware of all the different laws between the states, the country, and the cities. Um, and second, it's that's just not realistic. It's like, do you really expect somebody to move to another country even if they had slightly better laws? It's like even if some other country was letting you do that, like you move to Canada because you don't like America as much. It's like, but then when you have problems with the Canadian law, then they tell you the same thing. Go back to America then if you don't like it. It's like, well, no. How about you fix the law so that I don't have to keep trying to like hop from country to country, and that doesn't really even solve the problem. See, that's the problem with what he was saying. What I think with what he was saying is that he says later in the end of the book that the government shouldn't be forcing people to get along. Like it shouldn't be forcing people to have either segregated schools like they used to or non-segregated schools. That the government should not be forcing one way or the other. But then it's like, oh, that's a really unpopular opinion to have. Um, but it's like I don't know if I agree. I don't think I agree with that though. Um, because it's like someone could argue that it's an injustice that they were denied service at a restaurant because they were black or because they were white. And it's like, do you really want to live in a society where people have the right to deny you service because you're black or white? He makes it sound like, well, the private, business should have that right, and you can go somewhere else if you don't like it, but you can't go somewhere else because all the other private businesses, let's just say in the deep south, pretty much all of them would say no blacks or whatever, maybe in certain contexts. It's like you can't just go somewhere else if everybody says you have to go somewhere else. So that's why they had the Civil Rights Act. So I don't think he really understands what he's talking about. Like that we don't need government for stuff because people would naturally get along better supposedly if we didn't have the Civil Rights Act, or the opposite where we like enforce the idea that blacks and whites are not allowed to commingle. It's like, well, like history and logic says the opposite of that. Like, I do understand, I do agree though that the Civil Rights Act does set a dangerous precedent where it's like, where do you draw the line though? Like, are you allowed to deny serve? Like, where do you draw the line? Like, who are you allowed to discriminate against, and who aren't you allowed to discriminate against? Um, in my opinion, I think you should only be allowed to discriminate against people that might actually affect your business. Like, if somebody is, for example, uh, gonna steal from you, then you have the right to kick them out of the store. If they're gonna talk bad about your business while they're in the store, then you should be allowed to get them out of the store. But if they are simply, you know, a black person, like, they shouldn't just be booted out of the store because of that. They should have to be acting suspiciously, um, wearing a hoodie, um, and big sunglasses, and be looking at you all the time suspiciously instead of acting like they're shopping, just be looking around a lot or acting weird. Then I could see that person being booted from the store. But I don't think people should be booted from a business for being a conservative or liberal, or I mean maybe if you're a popular liberal or conservative, because it would possibly lead to bad reviews on your website. Maybe I could understand that, but to me that's not. I don't know if that's still justified, because that would be the problem would be lie with the people doing that, not with that person that's showing up at your restaurant, unless they showed up at your restaurant with the intent to make it a political event without your permission. But if they're just showing up at McDonald's just to eat a burger, even if they are a important political figure, I don't think they necessarily should just kick him out over that. But at least if they kick him out over, it affecting their business, um, I could kind of understand that. But they shouldn't be able to just kick somebody out because they're just an everyday conservative or not, especially if they're not like a popular figurehead. Anyways, um, let's go down and see what else we can talk about. Implied consent. I don't see a lot of people argue implied consent again about how, oh, you chose to live in California, so you should have to abide by California rules. Um, that doesn't even make sense, because a lot of people, for example, they grew up in California, like they were born there, they lived there. It's like, do you really expect a child to move out of the state, or a young adult to move? I mean, maybe, but it's like, I don't think a lot of people believe in implied consent like he says. Some people do. The people that, yeah, maybe are real statists, where they just want to justify everything the government does and find it excuses to like belittle people that argue against something the government's doing. But I don't think most people believe in this idea that just because you live in California, that you have to agree to all the California laws, because otherwise you could just move. It's like almost nobody really believes that. Even the statists, I don't know if they believe that. I think they mostly just say they do because they agree with the idea of authority overall, and don't like there. I think a lot of it stems from jealousy. They're jealous that other people don't follow the law as much as they do. Like they're more worried about what the government or what people think about them than other people. So they're jealous of people that aren't. They're jealous of people that are willing to take the risk, a risk that they aren't willing to take. So I think that's what causes statism, is that people people just are, they so want that what do you call it, pat on the back, virtue signaling, that they just want to support the state, or like it reminds me of politicians just saying these posts on social media, like photo ops and stuff, just to look good. Like all of a sudden they care about our soldiers, even though they sent a lot of them to die over something pointless in Iraq or whatever. It's like, I don't know if I really believe these politicians or people that are so pro government. Okay, now the people, when the founding fathers, I think, said something like by the people for the people, I think um, they meant the idea of government is to serve the people. But he's saying that doesn't make sense, because the government never serves the people, it only hurts them in a sense. But it's like, obviously most people don't agree with that. They believe that maybe especially a lot of conservatives believe there should be small government. Like I personally believe there should only be government when it's actually necessary. Like we shouldn't overcomplicate things by having government when it's not necessary. But other times I do feel it's necessary. I remember the Young Turks covering a video about um, firefighters let house burn down because they didn't pay their, whatever it was, $75.
See,
Now,
the fire.
now, I remember Jank getting really mad over this. It's one of his meltdowns over. I think that was a good meltdown though, because because yes, you shouldn't let. He did make some good points, um, because he does make some great points, because you shouldn't let a house burn down because they didn't pay their $75 if it's run by like a private business or what, like for serving the community, to just let the house burn down over $75, when there could be innocents inside, like pets. There could be a little kid inside of the parents, and they didn't have a choice whether to pay or not. So why should they be victimized because of a decision their parents made, or spread to, like you said, the neighbor's house and burn their house down when they maybe paid their $75? And even if someone didn't pay their $75, does that mean they deserve to burn to death? Like, see, that's the problem when you have private, you make it into a business for something that shouldn't be a business. Like the police and firefighters should not be a business. I agree with that. It is volunteer in a lot of areas, so I guess you could say that's not really a business and stuff. But when it's a volunteer ship, it's like they're not necessarily very trained though. Like imagine firefighters hundreds of years ago, they weren't very trained like they are now. They probably were just like average people volunteering to be a firefighter. Do you really want people that are not very experienced or knowledgeable putting out fires? I mean, it's better than nothing, but I rather have professionals putting out fires, and putting out all fires, whether you paid your $75 or not. So I think there should be government in some cases like this where you actually need it. But in other cases, I don't think you need all this government, for all the firearm laws that they keep passing when they don't even enforce the ones they have. Let's scroll down. It makes it seem like because someone has authority, it means they have more rights. Like a cop can do something that someone that's not a cop can do, like, pull you over for speeding or whatever. And he makes it sound like nobody should have a right to do something like that, or to force you to pay taxes. Um, but he even said people could agree as a community to, like, I believe that's what he said, to vote on stuff to that the community will pay for something. And it's like, see, again, it goes back to the free rider issue. It's like, uh, how do you go get around that issue if you believe in an anarchical society? Because isn't that not someone not giving their consent to pay for something, and you're forcing them to pay for it anyways? You know, it's like, or I guess maybe you're not forcing them to pay for it, but you're coerce. He keeps saying stuff about against coercion, but it's like, but society would use coercion if it wasn't the government. They would use coercion to, like, ostracize somebody maybe that didn't pay their fair share, or just not get along with them as much. So I don't think he's solving. See, his flaw in this whole book, I think, is he does correctly assume that having a government's not going to be a magic solution. We all get that, but he makes it sound like almost like the world would be a perfect place without government, but it wouldn't though. It would be like about as bad if you'd had no government, possibly worse or better. It's hard to say, but probably worse. But he thinks it'd be better, so he wants there to be no government. Even though he does benefit from the government in a lot of ways, like roads and water projects. I'm not a pro-government person myself, but certain things I do think we've needed government for, like the Hoover Dam. These big water projects would not have been accomplished without the government. That's just a fact. You could have some private projects that are funded by donations or the community, but let's go back to the Articles of Confederation, for example. What was the problem with the Articles of Confederation? They could not tax. Remember that in the Shays Rebellion? They had no power to impose taxes. Imagine them not having the power to enforce taxes. You would just have only the people that voluntarily pay taxes. So if you have people like Daniel Shay not pay, leading a bunch of other farmers or whatever to not pay taxes, eventually the government's going to get mad because they're like, well, we used to get more taxes from people volunteering it, but now we have a lot less taxes because of what you did, Daniel Shay. So, like, George Washington sent a bunch of military people after him to quash the rebellion, and then as soon after they did have the power, the national government did have the power to have taxation, as long as they had representation. And you say representation doesn't make sense, because how can a politician claim to represent you when he's really representing himself? Like, you can, yeah, vote him out of office, but then you just end up with another politician that represents themselves. So that's not really taxation with representation, one could argue, because you're able to vote a politician out, especially when it's so hard to recall a politician. It takes so much money and effort, and by that time they're almost out of office anyways. It's like, or let's say you do make it so that they can't run for office again. I mean, then it's just some other corrupt person that's in office. It's like, what's the point? All that effort for nothing. Anyways, let's see if we can scroll down. I do agree generally with what he's saying, though, that if somebody is the one initiating aggression, for example, Russia invading Ukraine, I would say that's aggression. That's unjustified, because that's like them out of greed or whatever they want to justify it. Or they might say because they have a lot of Nazis there that they should take over their land, or because they think it belongs to, they should be part of, like, the Soviet Union, like that was actually their land that Ukraine um, has, that should really be part of a bigger Russia. Whatever the reasons is, it's aggression because right before Russia invaded Ukraine, like I think what, a year or two ago, um, they the status quo was not like that. So to me, that is an act of aggression. However, the reaction of everyone else to it, I think, overreacted to it and want to not mind our own business and pay American dollars towards Ukraine when that doesn't benefit the taxpayers. It's like, how are you not only going to not represent most people, but also force money out of their pocket to pay for something that doesn't represent them, doesn't benefit them? Like, do most people think we should be forced to pay taxes to go to Ukraine? I guarantee if you polled, um, people, overwhelmingly they would say no. There would be a lot of people that would say yes because they just go along with whatever the government says, sure. But most people, I think, would say no. And even if the polls said they think it's justified, it's proof that it's not justified with the fact that nobody's donating their money to Ukraine. So do they really care about Ukraine? I think if they do care at all about Ukraine, it's very little. Little. Even these Democrats, that statists that are so pro-government, or like they want to brag about like having this Ukraine flag in their Twitter bio or whatever, their social media bio, like, oh, I'm so cool because I support what the government supports. It's like nobody cares except other kooks like you. Um, you know, it's so easy to find people, figure out what people are like now because they're so outwardly opinionated that, or you can just see their red colored hair and you already know what type of person they probably are, you know. Um, anyways, that's a tangent. Keeps calling police officers gangs, and I guess you could say it is a gang in the sense that um, it could be considered a gang in some sense that they commit crimes as a group, um, but I wouldn't I wouldn't always describe um, I wouldn't really describe them as a whole as a gang necessarily, even though I did see a lot of corrupt stuff as a police explorer. And I will agree though that all cops, but it's not just cops though, it's every job. Being a teacher, you have to go along with certain things you may not agree with, like all the kids wearing masks. You might have to, you know, have them wear masks even if you don't agree with it. But is that necessarily such a violation of your morals that you would want to lose your job over it? It's like that's what he expects people to do, though. It's like because they're a cop and they don't agree with pulling people over for traffic tickets, that they should have to not enforce their job or lose their job. I mean, because of that. It's like, but that's not reality, though. Are you really expecting people to lose their job just because they don't agree with everything about the job? Um, I don't think that's a realistic expectation. Maybe in theory, that's how it would be in a perfect world. That's how it would be, but nobody's gonna just. I mean, a few people will, yeah, quit their jobs as cops because they think it's too corrupt, but most people will find a reason to justify um, the corrupt stuff that other cops do in order to keep their jobs, or the corrupt stuff that they do out of necessity. Let's go scroll down. Yes, people do want government because they want to control other people, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of careless, stupid, and malicious people that can't be trusted to do the right thing on their own. For example, to safely use a firearm, to safely store it, to not shoot somebody over a petty dispute in a bar. So I can understand why we have firearm laws, but he's saying we shouldn't have any like authority, because how would that make this situation improve by taking a subset of those very careless people and giving them permission to control other people? Um, well, maybe because they don't tend to be as careless and stupid as other human beings. They could be, but chances are somebody that we put in charge that's not a criminal, that hasn't committed all these acts, are probably going to make better decisions for society than somebody that is going around shooting people, you know, getting into prison. So I don't think I agree completely with Larken Rose. Somebody that is less evil of a person is probably going to be. I'd rather have them in charge than someone that's obviously less corrupt. We're not just putting Andy random person in charge. That's the fallacy in what he's saying. He's making it seem like, oh, we just put any random person off the street in charge. Like even if they're a career criminal or whatever, we just put these people in charge to be a cop or whatever. No, to be a cop, you have to pass a background check. You can't be a careless, stupid, and malicious human being. At least not that much, or not on the surface, unless you hide your background somehow. You can't be a cop unless you pass like a lie detector test and whatever else they usually have. Uh, or same with being a judge or being a whatever. So I don't think this is a perfect argument that he's making, but he is right that they still could be corrupt, especially if they feel like they have an unlimited power or more power than the average person, that they're more likely to abuse it. Of course they are. And he's making it sound too that people are so used to authority solving all their problems that, they would, to solve problems, they rather either go to the authorities or create new laws, instead of solving disputes among themselves. Even though, like I said, like he even believes that there should be like someone in charge of the copyright issue, which goes against everything he makes it sound like. Um, it implies that he thinks it's justified for us to have a U.S. Patent and Trademark Office that's in charge of all these things, because he went through them. Um, you know, but it's like, how are you supposed to use their services, but at the same time argue that you shouldn't have them? I guess he says somehow it's not hypocritical, because you know, you could use the roads. That doesn't mean that you think there should be a government just because you use the roads. But it's like, it is going against your argument though. Let's scroll down. He does make it seem like school is mostly about learning to respect authority and being controlled, instead of actually teaching you something useful. That's part of it. I mean, we do pledge the allegiance and stuff, but that that's a very small part of the education system, and you're not forced to pledge allegiance either. We already talked about how the government justifies things because they have authority, whether it's right or wrong. Like, uh, what do they call it? I was just following orders. That's what the Nazis said. But they still got prosecuted because he does make a good point though about how even the authoritarian people admit that following orders is not a great excuse, because that's what the Nazis did, like to the Jews. They were just following orders. It's like people do admit that it can be wrong at times to follow the orders of the government, but for some reason they don't apply this. The deep statists don't apply that. I shouldn't say deep statists. The strongly statist type people, they make it sound like in the current government you're never supposed to um, be against anything. You're supposed to just be for everything. He's like, yeah, but those are the same people that would have when it was those are the same people that would have been Nazis or would have supported slavery. Are the people that just go along with whatever the government or society, mainstream society, does instead of thinking for themselves of what's right and wrong. They just go along with whatever authority says is right or wrong. See, those are the people that you got to watch out for. Those are the same like hypocritical people that are so judgmental about people in the past supporting slavery or this or that when they would have done the same thing because they're the type of people that just go along with whatever the mainstream media says or whatever the government says. So I don't really care about their opinions. I mean, I care in the sense that they have power to influence other people, but I'm saying I don't think you should listen to those type of people. The people that are strongly statist. But then you also have to watch out for the people that are strongly anti-statist too. It's like, yeah, I do agree in the sense that anarchism is seen as a fringe thing, and maybe it shouldn't be seen such as a fringe thing. Because well, it is so hard to imagine a society that's an anarchical society. Most of us don't even know of one society that's anarchical, really, because we're so used to using government for everything, solving all these problems. It's like you can't do anything practically without the government being involved. Like the stamp you pay goes to the government. Driving on a road, you have to worry about the cops. You can't really do anything without the government being involved. You can't go fishing. Um, I mean, you have to pay taxes to buy cigarettes. It's like the government's involved in dang near everything. So even when, oh yeah, he does, I can't, I'll find it later, but he says something about the grocery store is a good example where you don't have laws. Sorry, or you don't have, like authorities being involved in every little thing for the grocery store. Yeah, like that is kind of true. You have people choosing to buy things from a private party, like business that's selling it. Um, and there isn't necessarily a lot of rules in a grocery store um, that are from the public government, but there still are rules. Like you can't go into a supermarket and just shoot it up. Like obviously those are against public rules. Even if you're on private property, you can't steal stuff from the store. Like there's lots just because people don't normally break the laws in the grocery store, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't if you didn't have a government. If you had no government that would put people in jail for stealing from the grocery store, then almost everyone would be stealing. And then you would have it would be a lot harder to make money with a grocery store. So I don't know how society could function without all these public laws. So the idea that a grocery store is a good example of why you don't need government and how people, yeah, used to buy and sell without a government. They used to buy and sell without a government, but that doesn't mean that you don't need government to protect a lot of trade. Um, that never made sense to me. And then he talks about a black market too, like how it's seen as a bad thing to go against the government and to buy and sell, let's just say marijuana or untaxed cigarettes or whatever. Um, it's like, yeah, I agree. Some things with the black market, like it shouldn't, certain things shouldn't be illegal, like marijuana for adults, as long as they use it responsibly. Um, of course, not using it and driving or using it when you're about to go to work or something. But using it responsibly, I agree that, yeah, certain things should be legal, but I don't know, just some of what he says doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, some things should be illegal. Um, anyways, Let's scroll down. Some things used to be illegal, like drinking beer, and I do agree that, yeah, certain things shouldn't be illegal, like marijuana, when drinking a beer is just as bad. And people, yeah, are really judgmental and would say, oh, someone's a bunch of pot smokers or whatever. But it's like they have no problem with someone going to bars, getting drunk. It's like the same thing, but somehow they say marijuana is bad. See, that obviously is based on misconceptions on society where, yeah, people blindly trust authority, that the authorities are right because they wouldn't ban marijuana unless it was bad. It's like, but that's like circular reasoning. It's like it should be illegal because it's illegal. It's like that's not a good reason though, necessarily. Let's scroll down. Okay, yeah, there are certain things that people believe that he talks about that would have little impact on somebody. Like, if you believe the Earth is flat, I even posted that on Facebook and Twitter one time. I'm like, the Earth is flat. Let's see if Facebook or Twitter flags this as misinformation. And the reason why I made that post is because I wanted to prove something, that they only care about certain types of misinformation. They don't care about misinformation. They don't care if you say the Earth is flat. They only care about the controversial stuff, um, like about COVID vaccines or whatever. They don't care about you just not believing in Santa Claus, or I mean, you saying that Santa Claus is real. That's misinformation. How come that's not taken down from Facebook to say that Santa Claus is real? And a lot of these things, it's like it's debatable whether it is real or not. If you say God is real, could Facebook take down that post and say you're spreading misinformation? It's a debate though of whether it's true or not. So how can you say it's misinformation? That's like, see, I think everything like that should be allowed, but let the courts decide what's misinformation and what's not. If someone wants to sue over libel or slander, and let people discuss whether something like Santa Claus exists or not, instead of shutting down all the arguments. Uh, I'm not saying that they cover Santa Claus. I just mean theoretically. That's like saying, um, if it was really controversial for some reason in society, like half of people actually believed in Santa Claus, and the other half actually didn't believe in Santa Claus, then maybe Facebook would start caring more about that debate, whether Santa Claus is real or not, and start shutting down people that post, that Santa Claus is real or whatever, or the opposite. It's like, how do you determine what's misinformation or not? It's like it's up to Facebook to decide when they've been wrong a lot of what's misinformation, like about these. Like, are we supposed to just trust the CDC or government if you're Facebook or Twitter? It's like, but they're wrong a lot, so why can't we just discuss it? Like, the worst that's going to happen, I guess you could say the stakes are higher in the sense that somebody may die from COVID if they hear misinformation, but what if that misinformation is by our government, though? And they die because they thought, oh, I don't need to wear a mask because I got vaccinated. And the government says, at first I think they said the government said that vaccinated people can't spread the virus or are less likely to or whatever. Maybe they still say they're less likely to, but I think they made it sound like you can't spread it once you're vaccinated. But we obviously learned that that was not true. And just common sense, people, the reason why we got all these masks in the first place, common sense told us, why were all these doctors and surgeons and whatever wearing masks before the COVID pandemic? It obviously was for a reason. They're not wearing it for no reason. The CDC is like, well, the virus is so small that it could go through your mask or whatever. It's not an effective way to prevent. Yeah, obviously it's not a foolproof solution, but even if it reduces it by, let's just say, 50%, like, or even 10%. That's better than nothing. To wear a mask, than better than nothing. I'm not saying it should be forced upon everyone to wear a mask. I don't think it should, but obviously wearing a mask is better than not wearing a mask in order to prevent viruses from spreading. That's obvious. But the CDC made it sound like it had like zero effect. Kind of implied that it's not even worth wearing. And they almost seemed like they advised against it at first, until the media and people are like, well, obviously we know for ourselves that we don't trust authority, right? And see, that's the crazy thing, is these same people that don't trust authority, like the CDC about the mask, are the same people that supposedly all of a sudden trust authority when it suits them. You know, it's like, well, do you trust them or do you not trust them? Like, the whole reason why they changed is because people didn't trust in authority. That's the whole reason why they came up with all these new laws and stuff about COVID. We should shut down all these buildings. Well, you trusted authority to not shut down all these buildings at first, and then later you somehow trust them to do the exact opposite and shut down all these buildings. I guess you could say that's because of COVID. But it's like, these same people never applied that logic when we had the swine flu going around, or this or that going around. So, no, it's the people that change their opinion based on what other people in the media said. And logically, that doesn't make sense. A lot of people realize, because it's like, why are you all of a sudden applying completely different standards to stuff that historically we've never done that? We kind of did stuff like that for other things like the Spanish flu, but we've never, as a whole in American society or in other societies, we've never just treated a virus so seriously that we're willing to shut down like everything, practically just to stop it from spreading when it's going to spread anyways. Okay, let's scroll down.